Test, test, test.
So there it is, but why is it coming through?
Test, test,
I
test.
don't understand.
Good afternoon. We've been having some technical difficulties. Please hold. Welcome to the Monday, January 23rd council meeting. I will now call the meeting to order at 1:15 p.m. And we do have one added item that I will speak to, item 7D for Rural Renewal Stream Partnership. Does council have any further added items? Seeing none then, I would ask for a motion, please, to adopt the agenda as amended. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I would make the motion that we adopt the agenda as amended for Monday, January 23rd, 2022, regular council meeting. 2023, sorry.
Thank you. And as amended, we will move that item to item 7D, please. I will now call for the vote. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We have no proclamations and announcements, so we will move down to item 2, page 3 of your agenda, regular council meeting minutes for January 9, 2023. Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that the regular council minutes from January 9th, 2023 be adopted as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Blatz. Are there any questions, additions, deletions? Thank you. Seeing none, I'll call for the vote at this time. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move. Item 4, we have no public hearing today. Moving down to item 5, delegations and presentations. Page 9 of your agenda, please. Delegation, Mountain View Waste Management Commission. And who is introducing C.O. Williams?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Today we have CEO Michael Weatherick from the Waste Commission here today. And as part of his large portfolio, he is also CEO for the South Red Deer Regional Wastewater Commission. So there is an item on new business for an agreement renewal that if there are further questions to that, he can switch gears and steer us through. Well, no.
We would have to move the item up, but we can do that. Oh,
Okay, well, thanks, Brent. I'm just here in October to talk about the wastewater commission, and most people probably might remember some of that, but the idea was to just communicate what the commission's about, what its facilities were about, some of the services. So following that same vein, we're going to talk about the waste commission today as opposed to the wastewater, and I'll give you a quick overview of the facilities that we operate, and then probably an interesting debate will arise out of recycling and hazardous waste handling that the Waste Commission handles. So this slide is just a quick overview of the current landfill cell. Everybody probably knows the landfill itself is in Didsbury. The Commission owns 2 quarter sections of land there. So this is about 11 acres out of the 2 quarters. So there's quite a bit of land there. The landfill handles about 21,500 tons per year, give or take. As landfills go, that's actually really small, especially compared to the commercial operators that Mountain View Waste ends up competing with for commercial tonnage. The commercial throughput is actually very important to the Commission's financial viability. About 65% of the revenue comes from what I call commercial or uncontracted volumes. We don't really know exactly where that comes from, but it would include businesses, for example, in the town of Olds, county residents, places like that. It's not necessarily out of the county region. It's just from all over. So the total airspace is about 1.3 million cubic meters. It's been built over the last 15 years or so. We'll talk about the recent expansion here in a bit. We're sitting about 53% of the current airspace has been utilized. Included in that 53% is a lot of hydrocarbon soil. So about Sheena might remember, 5-6 years ago, the Commission took in a massive amount of contaminated hydrocarbon waste or soil at $4 a ton. We actually have more on the airspace right now than we'll probably need. So some of that may have to get moved in the next 20-something years as we start to fill up the landfill. So this little graphic here, this comes out of the survey annual report. So I don't know if everybody can see the mouse, but this kind of orange outline is the current licensed airspace. Unfortunately, whoever built the office and the scale house, this is probably 10 or 15 years ago, put it inside the airspace. So when we build the next cell, we're going to have to actually junk a lot of buildings and move all that, that infrastructure into the south. This square up in the northwest corner, that's the cell 6 that was just built back in 2021. The pink in here is indicative of something that's high, so more filled. The blue is a little less filled. Green is basically down to grade. And this white patch is on the sides here. This is areas that we've actually capped. So in our operating license, once you get to the license airspace height, you have to put clay, topsoil, planted, etc. So because those sites are already to grade, when we built the cell, we moved all the clay that we came across as we were building cell 7, put it over to cap the other. And that theoretically should keep our leachate water down a little bit. One of the biggest costs at Mountain View Waste is actually disposing of the leachate in the landfill. Last year was about $175,000. Remember, it was extremely wet last year. The problem is we built this big, I call it 22,000 square meter swimming pool with a liner. So the new cell, which doesn't have much waste in it yet, the water just hits it and runs right to the leachate. And it's been a major cost for us. The estimated remaining landfill life is, it's kind of hard to say for sure because things change, but approximately 20 to 25 years on this airspace. There's room to put at least another 2, if not 3 cells. This is subject to environmental approval, but there is room on commission-owned land, to build future cells. And other technology may or may not come into play as it goes. Has a company called Varmi Energy been here at the council meeting? So they're a waste-to-energy firm out of Norway that's trying to get critical mass to build a waste-to-energy plant in Alberta. But it's not happening soon, but over the next 20-some-odd years, the Commission's landfill should be able to meet the needs of the region. We've put in some significant capital investments over the last couple of years. So I talked about cell 6 construction. It was about $1.7 million. That adds about 10 years of capacity. And when you're building these landfill cells, I'm not an expert by any stretch, but I've learned, think of it kind of like an igloo. You have to build the bottom parts before you can build the top parts and get to the top of the airspace. So this phase is kind of one of the bottom legs of the igloo, and we've got one more to go to the cell to the south. So even though you've built the 2 cells, it does not mean you're full yet. You build up after you've built the foundational base. The Commission's financial state, when I started back in 2018 or so, wasn't great. The tipping fees were too high, really, to be competitive with the commercial operators out there. And I talked earlier about how critical the commercial or uncontracted volumes are to the financial feasibility. So when we lowered the tipping fees from, I think it was 125 a ton at the time, down to 95, they're now currently 97, we became much more competitive, brought in a lot of cash. We've gone from being in the hole and having a bunch of bank debt to financing all of these capital expenditures out of cash. So we currently have no debt and actually have a working capital surplus at the moment. The other thing we added in 2021 was a compactor that is designed or selected for this purpose. The previous one was kind of the best one the Commission could afford at the time, and it was kind of small. So if you're thinking like a snowblower or something like that for analogy, the Commission used to have a shovel. Now we have, big, massive snow removing machine. And these things are quite important. The last major capital expenditure was adding a shredder in 2022. We had rented a few of them prior to actually buying it. And what the shredder is used for is what I call soft, so it's like mattresses, couches, branches, other things like that. But mattresses are a big one. So you cannot compress a mattress. You throw it in a landfill, it doesn't change. It takes up a cubic meter of airspace. So we shred about 100 of them and put them in a rock truck, one truck. Like the volume reduction is tremendous to this thing. And that not only adds landfill life, but brings in a little bit of revenue as well to cover off some of those costs. The last item we put in was a real-time GPS. So right on the loader, or the compactor, itself, is a GPS, not like you have in your phone or in your car, but like a construction grade. It's down to about 10 millimeters of accuracy. in 3 dimensions. So the operators, as they're compacting and driving over, the machine gives them real-time insight into whether the waste is fully compacted or not. So instead of driving over it forever, hoping that you're done, or not driving it over enough, those are the 2 extremes, this technology is designed to optimize that. So with those changes, certainly number 2, 3, and 4, we've been able to get the compaction rates up to about 0.9 tons per cubic meter. We used to be around 0.5 or 0.6. So this is a significant increase. So think of that compaction rate as the measure of how fast you're filling up your airspace. So the higher that number goes, the longer the landfill lasts. So with some of those technology changes, we've been able to make a big difference not only on the lifespan, but also just the operational financial efficiency of the operation. So quickly for the town of Olds, these are always the favorite charts in the meetings. The town of Olds generated basically 1,300 tons of waste in 2022, and this is the history over the last 5 or 6 years. You get this seesaw pattern because it reflects how many times you pick up in a month, so it doesn't really draw straight lines. But the average monthly waste generation out of Olds has been remarkably steady for 6 years at about 100, 105 tons per month. So this chart does not include any of the commercial or any other non-recreational or non-residential tonnage. So this is just from your black cart pickup program. Looking at that on a cumulative basis, it's kind of a boring graph because all the lines pretty much fall on top of each other. And again, the average has been remarkably steady at about 1,300 tons per year. So how does Olds compare to the rest of the commission? I will caveat this with it's super sensitive to population data and how accurate the census information is. But updated with the most recent census, Olds is kind of the second best, we'll call it, of the commissions. You're running about I can't even see that, 0.38 kilograms per person per day. So that's roughly a pound or so per person per day. The commission average is about 0.44. That's pretty much in line with what I've seen throughout Alberta and whatever other public information I found. It's not that far out of range. The Cremona one is probably real. Carstairs is probably a little bit high because their population has been changing more rapidly than most of the other commission members as they bring on more and more developments. So that's kind of the overview of the MSW or solid waste side. We'll switch gears a bit now to maybe a more interesting topic. We'll see how it goes in terms of recycling and hazardous wastes. So on the hazardous household waste stream, think of things like paints, agricultural chemicals, glycol, used oil, all those types of things. Tires is another one. And the big one is e-waste. So everybody's probably taking their computers down to the landfill before it goes in a special box. The province expanded that program to be basically anything with a plug on a pilot project. So that's what hazardous, or that stream is. The second stream, and we'll break into these a little more detail as we go here. The second recycle stream is more the conventional blue box type stuff. And the commission runs 8 of those sites, of which 2 of them are right in the town here at, they're called Old Tracks in the co-op locations. I'm sure you guys are well familiar with those. And that's where things like plastics, cardboard, glasses, those glass type of stuff is collected. And the commission's only role in that end of it is managing the contract for the hauling of those bins. We don't recycle anything. We don't man the sites, nothing. We just phone the trucker, go empty bin at Olds Co-op. That's it. That's our only function. So digging in a little bit into the household waste side of things, ARMA, which is the provincial body that collects a lot of tariffs on products at source where people are buying various things. So think if you buy a tire, you think it's $10 a tire, or it used to be, I don't know what it is anymore, but if you're buying a tire, you're buying various things, you're collecting money that goes to the province then turns around and uses it to fund collection and treatment of these types of products, the household waste included. Like oil changes is another example. You get your oil change, you're going to pay an environmental fee. That money eventually comes back, tiny amounts, to the Mount View Commission to help subsidize some of those costs. You've probably heard about the Extended Producer Responsibility Program. This is, again, kind of a tariff structure that is prevalent throughout Canada and was just recently passed in Alberta in, I believe it was November last year. But they just announced about a week ago what that actually looks like, and it's basically nothing until 2025 in terms of decisions on where the money is going to be collected from and how it's going to be distributed. So it won't really impact us in the short term. At the end of all that, with the little bit of cash that comes back from ARMA, the residual cost of the commission are about $35,000 to operate that side of the business. So that's about $1 a person per year. If you think of it that way on the municipal fee, it's pretty reasonable. So we're going to obviously keep doing that. Our role is at Mountain View is to provide the bins for that. So we've got secondary containment tanks for oil, things like that, all the glycols, all the paints. Everything is collected and stored as safely as possible. And again, we arrange for the shipping and processing of that. Most of those products are handled and processed by contractors that are actually clients to ARMA. So again, the commission has no role in any of those. The e-waste guys, for example, they get paid about $330 a ton for the amount of e-waste they process. And I'll just put in my little shot for recycling. Out of that, they might get $6 worth of metal per ton. It's not a lot. So the economics of that whole thing are certainly challenging. We'll talk about that more as we go on. A lot of the hazardous waste treatment stuff, or the paints and those kind of things that are destroyed through incineration, that's historically been done at Swan Hills. And just like municipalities, the province has been cutting the funding to the Swan Hills plant. So as a result, they've had to up their tipping fees. So for example, the cost of getting rid of a can of spray paint has doubled in 3 years. It's not a huge cost to the commission, but that's just gets passed along. So on the hazardous waste side, we just want to be perfectly clear, the commission's committed to carrying on that service. We don't want to see, those toxic chemicals and things like that getting into the landfill and having to eventually be dealt with leachate and down the line to Red Deer. So let's switch to the slightly more controversial one. The regional recycling program. The commission recently sent a survey out to 6 members asking input on the level of service regarding the recycle centers. And specifically, it wasn't necessarily to terminate recycling, it was to terminate Mountain View's role in managing the trucking. It's a subtle difference, but I did want to point that out. Ultimately, it's going to impact the level of service that does occur. The options were to maintain current service levels, reduce to having the recycle centers at the transfer station in Sundre, Water Valley, and at the landfill, or closing them altogether. Of the responses we've had so far, everybody has elected the close all collection site option except for Mountain View County. They were leaning towards option 2. So that's kind of the results of the survey to date, but there hasn't been any action taken on that. So the recycling centers are supplement the blue cart programs that the municipalities own. In the transfer station setting, historically, those services were provided to give the rural residents a blue cart access, if you will, and that's how it's kind of evolved. But the recycle hauling itself accounts for about 12% of the commission's total operating costs, and it's 43% of the municipal fee. So it's a fairly significant cost item. After labor, this is kind of number 2. So all of the sites except for the transfer station are unmanned, and that's also a bit of a problem because contaminated loads is a massive issue in the recycling world. You put one dirty pizza box in a 40-yard bin full of clean cardboard, it might get tossed, like literally to the landfill. And if somebody mixes plastic and cardboard together or whatever, the haulers have a right to landfill it. So if we end up going with option 3, then it would effectively lower the municipal fees for just the recycling component from about $14 down to $250, give or take, $263. This hasn't been set yet by the board or even decided. I'm just giving you the range of what we're talking about financially. And as far as the cost to Olds, if we were to instigate that where the recycling system is closed, we would bill you on an annual basis, $106,000 less. From that, you could then go and operate the tracks and co-op centers yourself if council so decided. But the amount of waste that's actually going through that site is more like about $400,000 a year worth of the trucking. So about 2/3 of the hauling is actually done in Olds, but Olds pays whatever 936 is, 18 or percent, 20%, something like that, on the per capita basis. So the other things to expect if we do close these recycle centers is people will likely divert some of that tonnage to your black and blue cart programs. We've already had quite a few phone calls on this topic, even though any decisions really haven't been made. But we'll find out how it goes. If the municipalities choose to maintain the services that it is, if the board goes that way, the contract that we have with E360 is assignable. So the co-op and tracks bin tipping fee currently is around $525 for every tip, and then it's theirs. We'll talk about the contract suggestions here shortly. So that's kind of the background of what we offer, and then part of the political debate, if you will, that's been happening at the board, and not just this board, but throughout North America, is are these recycling programs actually achieving their objective, and are they financially viable? How much of this stuff is recycled? We don't have a way of tracking exactly how much recycled material is coming to the landfill, but I have sat in the office and watched your yellow recycling bins come through the scale and go directly to the landfill on more than one occasion. We have watched, and it's more contamination. I need to be perfectly clear here. This is not E360 just doing this to save money or any other contractor, and it's not just them. It's all waste haulers. We get a lot from waste management as well. We do see on occasion on blue cart pickup days in towns an increase in amount of trucks that come to the face of the landfill and dump blue cart contents in the landfill. We see trucks that will pick up at the landfill, drive around for a few hours, pick up waste wherever they are out in the county, and then head to the landfill. It doesn't happen all the time, but there is certainly a portion of recycling that ends up in this landfill, and we're not alone. This happens in every landfill in North America. So everybody's familiar with this, with that national sword, you know what I'm talking about there? When China used to buy most of North America's, most of the world's actually sorted recycled product. The term recycling in North America is kind of funny as well. So the stuff is collected, and then if it's exported, it's counted as a recycled product. Doesn't matter what actually happened to it. So I encourage people to go look. There's some CBC pieces, and another one that I circulated to Brent last weekend from the States as well, that talks about where this stuff is actually ending up, and it's used to get piled up in China and burned. And then when they close the boundaries, it's now going to Malaysia, Vietnam, places like that. And it may or may not be getting burned. Nobody really knows. But Germany was another country that was kind of held up as the recycling hero of the world. And then their government went and actually did a bit of an audit of where their products ended up. And they were quite surprised that of their 93 or something percent recycle rate, something like 75% of it was ending up in Malaysia, unprocessed. So it's a bit of a, potentially a game. There's definitely a lot of money to be made in collecting this stuff. And Canada does the same thing. So, but the only product locally, from what we're told from the processors, that is somewhat economic is cardboard, and it's seasonal as well. Depending, like in leading into Christmas, for example, cardboard prices go up because everybody buys from Amazon and they need more cardboard, as an example. Other times of the year, it gets really thin. Mixed glass, which has been collected in North America for decades, is a money loser. It makes nothing. It goes directly to landfills generally. Paper can have money in it, but the margins are so thin and the commodity prices are so wild that from one month to the next, this stuff often ends up being in a landfill from an economic point of view. So I've kind of covered off most of this particular one, but the other thing that the Commission's done over the last couple of years is we used to recycle, or call it recycled shingles and drywall, because it had been done for years. And in the past, the shingles used to be ground up and used for like paths and things like that, or all the members had a chance to use it on the paths, but the feedback came back that we don't really like it. It's messy and sticky and runoff issues and all the rest of it. So there's really nowhere to put this stuff. I did talk to Border Paving. They used to buy processed shingles at one time to put in their concrete, or sorry, their asphalt. And they don't buy it anymore because most of their customers put it in their specs that they weren't allowed to use recyclable materials anymore. So we just quit collecting these things that were called recycling and started charging them at regular tipping fee rates and landfill them directly. But as I mentioned earlier, we do know that we get sorted recycled products from our members and others right to the landfill, often more towards the end of the month. So what the processors will do, say a cardboard guy will say, I'll take 2,000 tons of cardboard this month, and every Waste Connections and Waste Management or wherever the world runs to get their cardboard there as fast as they can. When quota's done, it's got nowhere to go. It goes to the cheapest possible place. So even things like diesel prices can influence how much gets recycled. If a hauler has to drive at an extra 200 kilometers to get it to the MRF, and the diesel prices are too high and it's cheaper to send it to a landfill, they do. And we don't control any of the economics of that. So if the product price on any given day of the recovered product is economic, they will send it to their MRF, which is the processing facility or sorting facility, and recycle it, but they will not tell anybody how much actually gets to recycles, landfills, etc. So what can communities do to minimize some of that risk? And Brent and I have had these talks a lot in the past, and I've counseled other administration in the county as well to think these same things. But if possible, try to avoid ever owning the materials. So once they tip it in their truck, it's theirs. The latest trend is they tip it in the truck, and then the municipal owner is exposed to whatever they think it takes to get rid of it. And if you don't cap that, it could get incredibly expensive in a hurry. So that's one issue that I would recommend, and this is consistent with the contract that the commission has with our hauling. So try to keep away if you can from that processing fee. So it's pretty common now for somebody to say it's $500 to tip that bin at Olds Co-op, and then we're going to charge you $400 a ton to process it. And if we make any money, we're not going to give any to you under any circumstance. So to make it more fair, try to negotiate some of those levers. If they're starting to make money, maybe you get a little bit of a profit back. It's unlikely going to happen very often. So one that Brent and I talked about, and I've talked to the executives of E360, is will you give us bill of lading, it's called, or record of what you hauled from a recycle bin to where it ended? And that's been a flat no. You can even try to negotiate in your contracts that if they can't prove that it doesn't go to a MRF or a recycling center, that you pay a landfill fee that should be much less. Again, I'm not sure how that went for you, Brent. Probably not well. Other communities have tried it as well, but they're pretty tight. Finding any information on the recycling pricing is incredibly difficult. It's super tight. You can't Google, what's the price of cardboard today? And it turns out the only place you can get that data is a site owned by the 3 big waste companies in North America. So you can buy it, but it's very difficult to have any transparency on what the actual economic model of this looks like. So just to wrap this up, the next meeting is on March 27th. So we've had everyone but Sundry so far formally respond to the survey that I talked about earlier. And depending on what the board ultimately decides, the plan from here would be if we make any changes to the level of service, then the waste services agreements that we have with each community will have to be amended, as well as the membership agreement. That one could be a little more interesting because all 7 parties in this case are party to the same agreement. So if anybody disagrees, that could be a little different. There could be slight differences in the waste agreements, but the membership agreement is kind of an all-encompassing contract. And then once that decision is made, we'll need to give notice to the hauler, and if there's going to be any municipalities that want to carry on that service, you'll have to work on the transition of that contract, for example. So just throwing a target out there, I kind of think the earliest something realistically could happen here by the time those contracts all come back to the various councils is probably July. It might be later now, it might be earlier now, but that's kind of the the target that we're looking for there. And that's about it. Stole this slide from the wastewater one. It looks exactly the same. That beautiful graphics. So I'm sure there's questions or at least some debate. So I don't know if I can answer any of them, but we'll try.
Very much. I will open the floor to council for questions. I just have one myself. For hazardous waste, when you were speaking about that, what would you recommend for householders or for citizens when it comes to hairsprays and Lysol sprays and furniture dust sprays? They all say hazardous waste on them. Should they have their own bucket and put everything in that instead of throwing it right in your garbage? We're not supposed to, what are we supposed to really be putting, where are we supposed to be putting them?
I don't know if I'm qualified from a medical standpoint, where best to store it. Probably outside. If you can get that stuff into the waste stream, it'll keep those chemicals out of the environment. If you put it in the garbage, that can, whatever is in it, is going to get crushed by the compactor. Whatever liquid is in it is going to end up in the leachate, and that's going to end up in the Red Deer River. So separate it the best you can, minimize the risks. Don't fill up your whole backyard with hairspray bottles. When you get a bag of them, haul them down to Didsbury for a trip for the day, and that's about all I can recommend on that side.
Because you do have a center there that our citizens or anybody.
The only site currently, so to be clear, the Tracks and Co-op site do not collect those items. It's only in Didsbury. One of the reasons why Cremona started this, let's end the recycling centers, is people were dropping off hazardous waste, the couch, their old car, whatever else they wanted to get rid of was getting dropped off at the cardboard box. And that, because they're unmanned sites, that becomes an issue.
So that's being proactive anyways for the listeners. Any further questions? Councillor Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dole. Through you to Mr. Weatherwick. Could you tell me, so when we close these recycling centers, if that's the way it's going to go, which sounds to me like it's leading towards that way, would there be opportunities still for people to take their extra recycling to the landfill at Didsbury? Are you having sorted bins there, or is it just that's the end of it?
Assuming that option 3 is where the board mandate goes to, it would be the end of it. There would be no bins at any of the 3 sites. But again, the level of service issue is really around the commission no longer managing those sites. It does not mean that the town of Olds needs to stop it. You have the choice to maintain those 2 sites should you wish, as does Carstairs, for example, or Didsbury. Well, Didsbury doesn't. They don't have one. They would just be at the landfill itself. So it's still somewhat fluid in what the final decision is going to be, but generally option 3 means none. Blue card only.
Thank you very much. That was a really good presentation. Thank you. It was very informative.
Can only make solid waste so exciting, so I appreciate that.
Well, it was. It was very informational, very educational. Is there any further questions? Councillor Daly and then Deputy Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Judy. Through you to Michael. In light of, the advancement of technology and so forth in this area of solid waste, this time, going back to your map that you showed us previously, is there a plan in place to separate these materials that are coming in from the blue bins and potentially could have been recycled into a separate area from the common garbage waste that's coming in? Just planning forward that if something ever does show up in technology that would be feasible financially and environmentally, that these could be in a separate area, easily accessed?
It's a great question, and the answer is a tough one. If it's driven on economics, something the size of the Mountain View landfill, it's going to be incredibly expensive to do that because the product that comes to us is not sorted and it's a relatively small volume. So think Calgary and Edmonton, bigger centers, they do exactly that. In their Blue Card program, a lot of that stuff gets buried and they know exactly where it is in the hope that someday it might have some value and they go dig it up. In our case, we can certainly look at it, but just intuitively, the economics of that would be horrendous. It would be incredibly expensive to do that. Interesting, I was looking at another landfill operator in Alberta. It's called Clayhurst. It used to be the Beaver County Waste Management Commission, and they just flipped over to a municipal-owned corporation, not that different than ONET. And looking through their revenue, most of their revenue is coming from burying sorted recycle from Edmonton. That was quite interesting. So people do it if there's scale, and in theory, the waste management companies do that to some degree. So the downside of that, and this is maybe the best example, is everybody remembers what the old transfer station used to look like in 2018. I should have put some pictures in here, but I think most people probably remember. That was my welcome to Mount View, go fix this first day on the job moment. It wasn't that fun. Mary Ann, I'll get her for that someday. But that's what happens in these smaller settings. You'll get somebody that tries to mine out whatever they think is valuable, and they'll store it anywhere until it might have some value. And in this case, it ended up piling up at the old transfer station to the point where your fire chief, issued a stop work order. Luckily, I was able to get E360, who bought that previous contractor, to eat all of those costs. Contractually, it was a bit of a scrap, but that's kind of what happened to this stuff. If people store it and save it on a small scale, chances are it's just become somebody's garbage down the road. The recycling angle, the other point to mention is Varmy, so the waste energy team. They're actually most interested in recycled products to burn because it has the closest caloric value to natural gas and heating oil and all the other stuff. So if they take the recycled waste out of the MSW side, their economics get hurt substantially because they don't generate enough energy. So that's possibly a solution. That's what they do in China. They just don't do it through a $400 million heavily engineered oxidation unit like Varmy's proposing.
Deputy Mayor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and thanks, Michael, for the presentation. And just take you back a little bit in your presentation. Just could you talk again a little bit about that cost difference or put and take? If we stop the program, you said the annual variance would be like 106,000, but offsetting that variance was, I thought you said $500,000 cost potentially going the other way?
Right, so this is where it gets tricky, is the current hauling contract and the cost thereof become a component of the municipal fee for recycling. And Olds pays, I should have done the math, but it's 9,000 out of, or 10,000 out of 3,600, whatever the number is. I think it's around 28%, something like that. But at the old site, about 80% of the costs and the hauling is at those two sites. So if we end the recycling for all members, that municipal fee would go away and it would be returned at the per capita level. And if Olds were to pick it up, essentially you'd be saving $100,000 in municipal fees, but being exposed to $300,000 or $400,000 to maintain it. Even though everybody knows the volume is coming from all over the place, right? Everybody in the counties, Didsbury, wherever, everybody's coming to the more of the commercial center in Olds and likely would use those sites. Especially if you're the last one standing, you're going to get a lot of it.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. No further questions? Well, we'd really like to thank you for your presentation. Once again, it was very informative. Thank you so much. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that the Mountain View Regional Waste Management Commission's Chief Administrative Officer, Michael Weatherup, be thanked so much for his attendance at today's meeting, and that council accept this presentation as information.
Thank you. I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Moving down to item 5B, page 10, please. This is the delegation for Enterprise Fleet Management. CEO Wilson, who's introducing, please?
Director Linderman can introduce the guests.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Shannon Marshall with Enterprise Fleet Management. She's here today to present to council on some open-ended leasing. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you. Welcome.
welcome, or hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that I see if I can open this up a little bit bigger, but if not, no problem at all. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Sheena, Brent, Scott. Good to see you all again. All right, we are with Enterprise Fleet Management. You're probably familiar with Enterprise Rent-A-Car. We are the more so leasing and fleet management division of the Enterprise family. And we are here today to present to you really uncovering overall cost savings efficiencies that we've been able to identify when we performed an analysis on your fleet. And to give you a little bit of background and context as to what we are currently doing across the RMA and Canoe is we've actually gone already through the RFP bidding process, and we have been identified as the preferred provider for fleet management services. Currently today, we've partnered with over 20 different municipalities across the prairies, and this is what we are looking at here today for Town of Olds. So I know I just want to be mindful of our time, so do we still have in and around 20 minutes or so to kind of go through the presentation, and then of course for questions after? Okay, excellent. Well, let's just go right in here. Oh, thank you. Okay, so executive summary is where we'll start out, and just really talking about conversations that we've had, what we've been able to identify and uncover when meeting with the three of you here today, and then what we're looking to achieve in an overall partnership and those objectives. And then we'll probably jump right into the total cost of ownership, your 10-year model, because I think that's going to be where we're going to see that major savings and benefits, and keep it kind of high level. And of course, we can dive into the additional resources that we have, like our fuel, maintenance, and telematics services as well. Okay, so, oops. All right, so currently today, it sounds like you are you're acquiring your vehicles through local dealers, you're paying cash for your vehicles. There has been some concerns just overall with the overall aging of the fleet, and maybe not taking as much of an advantage of those newer, more safer, reliant vehicles that are coming in. And when it comes to the operations right now, mostly everything is outsourced for when it comes to decals, safeties, lighting, maintenance as well. You do use you have a local vendor by the name of Robbins, as well as you're utilizing your dealers when it comes to maintenance. And then of course you do have your fuel that's purchased through in bulk through UFA and RMA. No telematics as of right now. It sounds like there isn't much interest in this just because vehicles are staying pretty local. They're not really going out too far outside of the town. And then when you are disposing of your vehicles, right now it's kind of just a one vehicle each year. And that's more so just like that older vehicle, maybe the one that's mostly run down, causing you the most issues. But there's no actual disposal target. And then when you do bring your vehicles to disposal, it's going through auction. So when I identified your fleet, we looked at, you have GM, Ford, and Ram, which we do find is pretty common with all of our government partners. There's about that 17-year holding period. Obviously, some are a little newer than that, but we have some older ones in there. Average age of the fleet is at that 12-year mark. Your annual kilometers is I think just around 7,000, but overall odometer reading is at 79,000. So you do have a lot of trucks, but you've got a sprinkling of your SUVs, you've got your 1 tons, and of course your 55 and 550 chassis in there. And then really when you are acquiring your vehicles, you do look at that lower trim level because of course that makes sense, and that's what I would do initially is looking at something that's going to cost less if I'm going to hold on to it for a long period of time. However, when we implement our strategy, and this is very similar to how we run our business model at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, which is identifying the right vehicle and also identifying the right term. So really it's the right vehicle, right term, and identifying what is that sweet spot so that we can capitalize on the ability that you all have to get a low acquisition price because of government fleet concessions, also selling high at that point where that vehicle has a lot of value, and then minimizing your operational expenses in the middle, which is your downtime, your maintenance, and your fuel. That's really, going to be the key objective that we'll be looking at here, and really being able to optimize your fleet as much as possible while staying within budget, and actually, if anything, below budget. And yeah, that's pretty much everything that we've talked about here, just on this slide. The big thing, though, too, is that our approach is to be very hands-on. So we're not going to just come in today and present to you our plan. We're going to want to sit down and meet with you all year over year, and then also throughout the year, to ensure that that original plan that we've put in place is still the right plan in that next year and in the years to come, because obviously there's going to be changes within the town, there's going to be changes externally in the market, and we just want to make sure that we're very proactive and we're ahead of that. And that's why we also provide very flexible financing, flexible plans as well, which we can definitely talk about. All right, so I'm just going to jump ahead here just to the 10-year model. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. So I hope you all can hear me okay. What we're looking at right now is basically just a snapshot in time of your fleet today, but also projecting and looking 10 years out, of course. So I'll kind of just start out at the top and talk about some of those assumptions and some of the key identifiers that went into this analysis. So right now, out of the 27 units that you have currently, that current cycle time is about 9 years. Current maintenance is about $125 a month, with that maintenance cents per kilometer being about 23 cents. There's no fleet growth as of right now, meaning that your fleet is going to expand beyond the number that you have. When we look at the annual kilometers, 65,000 is average across the fleet, with the current liters at 100 per 100 kilometers is about 20. And then when we look at, again, your whole 27 vehicles, because these are all utilized vehicles, that cycle time we've identified would be around 4 years. So we'd be moving from about that 9-year down to the 4-year. Proposed maintenance, we would be able to lower to about $41 per month. And then that price per liter, we had just marked everything at $1.50. All right, so now just looking at that first line, which is that yellow one right at the top there, under the fleet mix, fleet costs, and annual headers. So out of the 27 units, on average, in the last few years, you definitely have had about 1 vehicle per year, and maybe there hasn't been any new vehicles acquired. Thank you. And then, but of course, we've seen some previous years where you had 4 or 5 vehicles, a little bit more than that. Now, when we come in as fleet consultants, looking at that best case scenario, you're going to see that this is a bit of a rip the Band-Aid off approach where, sorry, I'm just having a hard time seeing that.
You try to zoom in a little bit?
Oh, thank you. Yes, my glasses are not as sharp. Thank you, that's helpful. Sorry, just sticking still to that first yellow line. So when we look at those 3 units, because you're paying cash for your vehicles, it's about $181,000 that in and around you're tying up if you're purchasing 3 vehicles each year. With maintenance, you're spending in and around $40,000. That fuel is about $52,000, and then your overall fleet budget, so basically this is what you're spending each year, give or take, on your vehicles, is about $275,000. Now, as I was mentioning, this is us coming in as your fleet consultants and saying, okay, best case scenario, looking at those vehicles that are either at that sweet spot or just after the sweet spot, but are probably costing you maybe a little bit too much in maintenance and repairs and downtime. We would look at cycling out 19 vehicles in the first year, but I just want to pause for a second and say that this isn't necessarily what needs to happen in order for us to partner. We can definitely start out with looking at 5 vehicles, 10 vehicles. Really, we can narrow it down and look at whatever makes most sense, because at this stage, you do know your fleet more intimately than we do. So maybe there's a few vehicles that you've just, for example, put a new motor in, let's just say. So that's going to be, a cost that you're going to want to get your money's worth. And we wouldn't necessarily look at cycling out that vehicle in that first year. But just looking at the age of the vehicles and knowing that you can get those government fleet concessions and knowing that you have a lot of equity in your fleet, this is going to be that recommendation. So now we're looking at lease payments. Now, I just want to say also, when you hear of lease payments, you probably think of a dealer lease, where a dealer lease is very different than our open-end equity leasing. which means that there are no mileage restrictions. There's also no wear and tear restrictions. And we're also flexible with that lease term. So right now, these vehicles are all based on their total cost of ownership in that sweet spot. They're going to be, the recommendation is to cycle them out really anywhere between 24 months to 60 months. Where we may come back to you and say, instead of that vehicle being cycled out at 60 months, it may make sense to cycle that vehicle out at 48 months because things are getting back to normal. We're starting to see dealer inventory levels increase, and we're starting to see fleet concessions increase as well. Your fleet concessions, of course, are those discounts that you get from the manufacturer right off of the invoice price of that vehicle. So I just wanted to say that that is flexible, that lease term. But in this scenario, we have the 19 vehicles. We're going to be, of course, making lease payments, but then you have $79,500 worth of equity in those 19 vehicles. So that equity can then be rolled into those lease payments, lowering that overall budget for the vehicles. And then we have maintenance at $21,000. So we're slashing your maintenance down in half, essentially. And you're probably wondering, well, how are we doing that? Well, again, we are getting you out of those vehicles that are costing you too much money in maintenance and repairs. We're also going to be implementing our maintenance programs. We have 2 different maintenance programs that we can talk about here in just a moment. That's going to ensure that those vehicles are going in for their scheduled maintenance on time, but also at that lowest cost to the town as well. And then fuel. So we're going to be lowering your fuel down to $43,000 from the original $52,000. And the way that that's happening is because, of course, those vehicles that are where we have fuel degradation taking place, we're now getting you out of those vehicles where maybe it's about 20 liters per 100 kilometers. We can get you down to a vehicle that's much more fuel efficient. It's actually government mandated year over year that each new model year has to be more fuel efficient than that previous model year. So taking advantage of that as well. So we now have your fleet budget in and around the same. Of course, now because this is we're biting off a larger chunk with those 19 vehicles in this scenario. Like I said, we could be a little bit less aggressive. It's whatever makes most sense. But we can actually start to refresh 19 vehicles in your fleet. And it's actually still going to cost, you're going to see a savings of $661 of that net cash in that first year. So going into the next, in the next few years, you'll see in 2024, there's only 4 vehicles that we would look at cycling out. So whether that blend is more, 10 in that first year, and then we add those other 9 in the next year or in the next year after that, right? Again, this is just kind of us taking a look at your fleet and that snapshot of the next 10 years. But overall, each year we're going to be cycling out of a few vehicles. We'll also have some vehicles now in that 2024 where you'll actually have some equity out of the leased vehicles. So you'll see the lease payments are $341,000. Your equity of the owned vehicles that will be cycling out is the $34,000, and then you'll actually have about $87,000 worth of equity from the leased vehicles. So in some years, that budget may go up a little bit more, just all depending on how we move through that fleet list. And then in some years, you're going to see huge difference in that net cash and in that savings. But overall, in the 10 years, just kind of floating down to that larger number that you see down there is $125,000 with an average sustainable savings. And I'll just move this over here. Just under $7,000. And the reason that average sustainable savings is important is because that's actually looking at the last 5 years out of the 10 years, and that's where we have now gone through your entire fleet. They would all be under the Enterprise Fleet Management Program, or we're still realizing a savings of $7,000 per year than what you have currently today looking at your fleet budget. So I'm just going to bring this down over here to the bottom left graph. And it just basically, equity is such a big and important piece and that we focus on so much because this just allows you to do so much within your budget and so much within your fleet. So as I mentioned before, those 19 units, that's about $79,000 worth of equity. And in the years to come, you start to see, you still have substantial numbers there. But the big thing is that now when we have these equity or when we have leased vehicles coming up for a term and we're cycling through those, you're actually going to get really high returns. Like for an example, in 2027, $409,000 worth of equity that we're going to have coming back to the town. So lots of exciting numbers to see here. And overall, again, bringing it back to that 10-year savings of $125,000, I think would be obviously very substantial and make a big impact to the town. One of the things I wanted to just mention really quick is I know, and this happens every time we meet with our government partners, is there's that perception of these new vehicles on the road. And of course, that, in my mind, I would think, oh, that's a new vehicle that costs more than an older vehicle, right? However, we've just uncovered the reason why this does in fact cost less money, and we've done this now for, I think, probably Cardston County, Camrose, maybe they're probably some of our oldest partners, 6-7 years now we've been doing this for them. So in the synopsis that I had sent out last week, if you've had a chance to speak to any of the primary fleet contacts from those municipalities, they would be able to speak to this and say that Enterprise has had, sorry, did you have a question? Sorry? Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. That they can speak to it themselves, right? Rather than Enterprise being the ones telling the story.
Ties in with the conversation you're just sharing right now. Your current partners, I see one City of Lethbridge and one Town of Peace River. All the others are counties.
Yeah, so here in Alberta, Town of Peace River is the only town. I know we have a few towns, I believe, out in Manitoba as well.
We do work with City of Morden
And
out in
cities.
Manitoba
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, it really has become a bigger part of our business, the government space in recent years, which is of course how we've partnered with RMA and with Canoe. So we have kind of continued that trend, but over the last couple of years, we've seen a huge improvement in that area because this makes a lot of sense. And thanks to the partnership with Canoe and RMA, it's very good pricing compared to, let's say, just the commercial partners, not just government. So for you guys, of course, the pricing, there is no markup, for example, as far as it pertains to the vehicles themselves when we acquire them, which again, none of our other customers get. So it makes a lot of sense for our government partners, and that's why we've seen a lot of that growth recently.
Before answering that, I was just curious. I'm certain it's going to be a growing period from us attending the
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And just back to that point of that perception, of course, this is something that we're having this discussion here today. I believe this is being recorded, but also something that can be, put out in newsletters, if there's any sort of blogs, anything like that, right? So that at least we can put everyone's minds to rest, and they know that vehicle is actually going to cost the taxpayer a lot less amount of money than running a vehicle for 12 plus years. All right, just looking at the previous slides, we'll just go back here and maybe we'll minimize it.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. So you're probably wondering, where did we get these numbers? Okay, I think that's going to be where we're at. And again, looking at just the best case scenario, 19 vehicles is where we would start, but we can definitely walk before we run. But you'll see your entire fleet list here is listed. And you'll see in the bottom half of this page, it's really just looking at those vehicles that are over 10 years. So we know that is, historically speaking, those vehicles are going to be costing you more money. And either it's already happened or it's about to happen where we see that next big repair come through. So let's take advantage of selling these vehicles still and getting you a good return. And we can look at the equity numbers on those, as we just mentioned, that first year is $79,000. And then taking advantage of that introductory pricing with the manufacturers, taking advantage of the fleet concessions that are available to you, and then now putting those vehicles on a maintenance program, as well as having monitored fuel and just overall monitoring the expenses of these vehicles and moving forward. Okay. I think we still have a few more minutes, but we can dive into maybe some questions? Yeah, okay, sounds good.
very much. I'll open the floor to council at this time if you have questions. We'll start with Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dahlin, through you to our representatives here today. You mentioned regular maintenance would be done on the fleet that would be, and the maintenance cost, would reduce our maintenance costs. But my question to you is, would the maintenance be done locally by some of our local people then, or would we be taking it elsewhere? It would be done locally?
Absolutely, yeah. We fully understand the importance of keeping that local presence and keeping the fleet local as well. So
Okay.
one of few things could happen. Of course, you know, we can set up Robbins, as I mentioned, as a preferred vendor. So we would go directly to them and say, hey, you know, we are going to be partnering with the Town of Olds, and this is how our programs work. Sorry, I keep hitting the microphone. And then not only are they going to continue to get the business of the fleet of Town of Olds, but they could also get business from any of our other partners that are operating within the area. So, and Enterprise just pays them directly. So, yeah, absolutely, we want to keep that relationship as local as possible.
Councillor Daly, and then Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Judy. I have a few questions here, but I'll just start off with one here. In the organization here, of course, we have busy times and we have slow times. You know, in the summer times, we're ramping up for a lot of parks works and so forth, and then in the winter, things slow down as far as maintenance. Is it a possibility to have a flexible inventory to reflect these busy and slow times so that we don't have vehicles depreciating, sitting in our lot, waiting for the next summer?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. And that's something that is what we're looking at each year, determining, are there underutilized vehicles? Are they sitting for more than 6 months? Or what is that sweet spot that it actually makes sense for you to hold on to this vehicle and have it as a lease? Or does it make sense to sell that vehicle and then maybe rent something in place of that, right? So again, us being Enterprise and working really closely with our colleagues on the rental side, we can put together a total transportation solution package for you to make sure that you are actually paying the lowest amount possible for your fleet overall.
Yes, supplemental, Councillor Daly?
Thank you. So your numbers that you presented here today do not reflect that then? These are year-round vehicle leases that we're talking about in your numbers?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. So we can absolutely look at you know, a bit of a revision to narrow it down a little bit more as to which vehicles are actually sitting for certain periods of the year and what is that sweet spot. And I have found after running the analysis numerous times that usually it's around that 6-month mark. So if a vehicle is being used for 6 months or longer out of the year, it makes sense to actually have it as a lease. But if it's being used for 6 months or less, it may make sense to have that as a rental. But of course, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We would make sure that we're tailoring that specifically to your fleet.
And if I may, Councillor, so the biggest part of this is that we don't want to come in with just a one cookie cutter approach, but rather an actual ongoing plan, right? So a big part of this and what makes us different is we have a whole dedicated team that actually works with you guys on, you know, on an ongoing basis, but certainly at least on an annual basis to plan out the fleet needs for the upcoming year. So, for example, let's say this year you guys have you know, 3 vehicles that are underutilized. Well, we can identify that alongside you, but maybe next year, you know, you actually have a growing need as a result of maybe some changes, right? So we can act accordingly, again, put a plan in place. So it's really important that we talk about that because that is a big part of what makes it different is that ongoing account management support that helps us, again, always have the most optimal strategy for what's happening that year for you guys and also what's happening in the industry, which especially right now with everything that's going on with shortages and such, it's important to have, again, a lot of that support.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I just have a question with regards to the electric vehicles. So there has been conversation by this council last year or so about electric vehicles. Where would they fit within your purchasing? And do you deal with any of the electric vehicles with any other communities right now?
Yeah, great question as well. And we know that that's such a hot topic and there's just so much buzz around the electric vehicles. So that's like Juan just mentioned, it's not really going to be a cookie cutter approach. So we look at what is the availability and does it actually make sense for the town? We have to consider infrastructure, and what we're looking at right now is for those particular vehicles, can we install a charging station, right? And how much is that vehicle going to be used? And then we can expand from there. But absolutely, we do have partners that have electric vehicles on the roads right now, and it's because we have the support and the infrastructure for that particular organization. So we would just assess that specifically for Town of Olds as soon as we possibly, well, we would get started at looking at that right away, but we would implement electric vehicles as soon as it makes sense. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, one more thing. So through the partnership with Geotab, which you guys might have mentioned or might have seen throughout the presentation, we actually can do a feasibility study. So it's something where, because we have the data of how the vehicles are being used, which days, how often, how far, all that data crunching can be done behind the scenes by our team to present you guys with that study of, okay, out of these 27 vehicles, let's say 20 of them actually have the physical ability to become electric vehicles because they don't drive, let's say, the longest distances all the time. So they can, go there, come back in time, and still be, with a lot of range left type of thing. So certainly part of the analysis that we can certainly do for the whole team.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, and then Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and thanks for the presentation. I have a couple of questions. One is, can you help me understand, take me through the net cash calculation there? 661 in 2023, I think, and as high as 140 or as low as 140. Can you help me understand the basis for that net cash calc?
Yes, absolutely. So in that first year, what we're looking at in that first line is really what we're seeing is your budget currently today, and then looking at the next year and cycling out of 19 vehicles. So we would have 19 vehicles on lease, and we would still have 8 vehicles owned. We would now have lease payments of that $289,000, but then we would utilize that equity that you have out of the 19 vehicles, put that towards the lease payments. Overall, we're looking at just budget purposes. We're going to lower the maintenance down by half. We're going to lower that fuel as well. So that's the difference, is that $661 in net cash in the first year. Now, as I mentioned before, there are going to be some years where that net cash is maybe a little bit higher than what we're seeing the budget is today. But overall, we're going to see a 10-year savings of $125,000, because in some years we have that net cash being $277,000. So obviously, this is something that the town can decide, whether you can keep a portion of those savings from the previous year and put that towards the following year, or we just kind of flatline it out a little bit more so that we have a little bit more of positive numbers year over year.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll have a couple more questions, and then I think our time is up. Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and through you to Shannon, and maybe perhaps Juan, or maybe this would be an administration question. You did mention selling off the existing, as we replenish the fleet, and you mentioned selling off the older vehicles. Would that be something the Town of Olds would take on to do, or that's something that you guys would do on our behalf?
Yeah, such a great question as well. We would completely take this off of your plate. So again, we can keep things local, right? So if there are local dealers that right now or auctioneers who are looking for vehicles or kind of used to getting these vehicles come across their lot, for sure. But we present to you the option of, if we go through our network of wholesalers, dealers, exporters, because we actually have 2 major remarketing lots, one in Edmonton and then one in Calgary. But we can realize a 10% higher return or whatever that number may be. Would you like to go through this option, or would you like to kind of keep it local, right? So we present to you those options, but essentially what we're ideally wanting to do is deliver a vehicle to you turnkey. Really all your drivers have to do is put the pink slip in and it's ready to go, and then we're picking up your old vehicle for you and selling it on your behalf. Our remarketers, their sole purpose is to sell your vehicles as quickly as possible and for as much as possible. But of course, when we initiate our partnership, we would come to you and just so you can verify what your options are and which path you'd like to take.
Thank you very much for that.
Of course.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor Wilson, and then Councillor Daly should do that.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Can you explain a little bit about the length of the contract, the term of the contract, and severability or an exit if either you or we decide after a couple of years we no longer want to maintain the contract, what the cost would be or a penalty to terminate the agreement?
Absolutely. So when it comes to length of contract, each vehicle is essentially going to be its own contract. And you'll see also that, it ties into our master lease agreement. You'll see in the master lease agreement that there is a lot of flexibility there. So really What we do have to abide by is the manufacturer's requirements, which I believe for Ford is 6 months slash 15,000 kilometers, where we hold a lien on the vehicle and we can't transfer that lien until we've either hit that 6 months or 15,000 kilometers. But at that point, there's that total flexibility where if we need to sell a vehicle because you're defleeting or because maybe we need to get into a different vehicle, absolutely you can do so. The only thing is we ideally want to wait until you're in a equitable position. So usually around month 11 or 12 is when we see most of these vehicles are going to be in that equitable position. So you're not going to be upside down in the lease and you would actually get some money back when we bring that vehicle to market. Of course.
Okay, we'll take 2 more questions for add-on. We've got quite an agenda to continue with. We've got Councillor Dallaire and Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. Question about when does the switch get flicked to change that vehicle out? Now, you had mentioned that our existing fleet is sitting at about a 7,000 kilometer average per year, which isn't much. It's way below what market actually dictates. Is it a kilometer number or is it a year number that switches that vehicle out at the end of its term?
Yeah, it is several factors. So what we always want to ideally abide by is getting you out of a vehicle that's either 5 years old or 160,000 kilometers, because that's when we start to see that, of course, we see the spike in the operational expenses. We also see the value of the vehicle drop. So that's maximum, but it all is going to depend on the vehicle, the vehicle type, the year or the age of the vehicle, the mileage of the vehicle. But a big factor, especially for your your 1 tons and your 550 chassis, is that upfit, because we know that upfit is going to be quite pricey in comparison to something like an SUV or a half-ton pickup truck, which is pretty straightforward. So this is why we do run a model that basically encompasses all of these cost factors and making sure that we're taking that all into consideration to determine what is that sweet spot for that particular vehicle. So like I said, some of your vehicle, the recommendation would be on a 24-month or a 48 or a 60-month. And that can also change based on the acquisition price of the vehicle and the incentives that you'll get year over year. Because right now, manufacturer incentives are low in comparison to pre-pandemic days, but they will start to increase in the following years. So this all goes into considering when is the right time to cycle out of that vehicle.
And ultimately, we do all put it, so basically this is the summary where we're plotting in what the cost would be on the enterprise side, utilizing or after utilizing our models, right? So basically, as Shannon mentioned, we do plug in each individual vehicle to find out, hey, if we were to replace it year 1, what would that look like? Year 2, year 3, year 4, all the way to basically see, hey, what is that lowest total cost of ownership overall, with taking into consideration all those variables. And that does change, right? So right now, for example, the resale market is very strong due to the low demand or low supply. But maybe in a couple of years from now, that might switch. And so our recommendation at that point might be that the lowest cost of ownership would be if we hold it for, let's say, 5 years as opposed to 4. Or sometimes it's been the last couple of years, actually, we had most of our partners selling their vehicles off at the 1 to 2 year mark, because it actually ended up appreciating their vehicles. They ran them for a year or 2, and we actually sold the vehicles for more money than we originally purchased it for them. And that was every single day, basically, we were doing that. So now that's always going to be the case, right? It still is a little bit right now, but that's the whole importance of making sure that we are actively looking at it.
Thank you, and finally, Councillor Ryan.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Dolan. This might be a question more for administration. One thing I noticed that's not in here is the calculation for insurance. And if we have 12 years average on our fleet right now, what would make the difference in the insurance cost if we're running, vehicles that are 4 and 5 years old? Does it make that much difference, or is I wouldn't have a clue. I mean, I know how it affects my insurance, but how does it affect our insurance overall? And that's not calculated in this.
No, it's not something that I've looked into yet, but we don't see huge differences in our insurance premiums from vehicle to vehicle.
So it's usually just a whole, they take everything as a whole number as opposed to.
Yeah, so being in the pooled with Alberta municipalities, the premiums are pretty much all the same for all of our vehicles.
Super, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your, did you have anything further? Okay, very good. Well, we enjoyed your time here and your information sharing with us, and I'm certain our administration will have a discussion back with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
You bet. I'd like a motion, please. Okay, Deputy Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I make the motion that Shannon Marshall with Enterprise Fleet Management be thanked for attending to the January 23rd, 2023 regular council meeting, and the council accept the presentation as information.
Thank you very much. I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. We will move to page 17 of your agenda at this time, and we're just going to check if Sarmat is still here.
Thank you. Could you take a 2-minute recess, please, so we can connect?
Absolutely. Well, do you want to take 5? Is that too long? A 5-minute recess we will take at 2:30 p.m.
Mixed. Still got about 5 more questions.
Which is okay for the most part. Like you said, he could be here in 40 minutes if you wanted him to be. I thought we're probably okay.
That's the reason why our vehicles are aged to 12 years, because they have to probably don't even hit 100,000. You know.
-03.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. At this point, I'd call for the vote. Those in favor of first reading, that is carried. I would like, Councillor Walsh had his hand up. Secondly, would you like to set the public hearing date?
Thank you, Mayor. I move that council sets Monday, February 27th, 2023 at 1 PM in council chambers as the date and time and place for the public hearing bylaw number 2023-03.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. And as Sarmat has been so patient with us, is there anything further you would like to speak with in regards to bylaw 2023-03 land use amendment?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As of now, there are no comments.
You really do have patience. I have to honor that. All right, we have a motion on the floor. I'll call for a vote. Those in favor? That is carried. We will now move to page 23 of your agenda. This is item 6B, and this item, one moment. This item are administration changes to the land use bylaw, an amendment to the land use bylaw for administrative changes, and I'm looking for a motion, please, for first reading. Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that bylaw number 2023-04 to amend the land use bylaw be given first reading.
Thank you. I will ask if there's any questions prior to moving. Thank you, Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I do have one question, and perhaps it's just me, but on page 30 of our agenda, under subsection 6C, item number 3, the date that the 40 days to process the application expires just didn't read well to me, and I could maybe use a little bit of clarity on that, perhaps, through you either to administration or maybe perhaps Mr. Sloan is here as well.
It sounds like a housekeeping, Mr. Sloan, would you like?
And perhaps it's just me, but
Councillor Blatz, which page?
Page 30. 30 of the agenda, section 6, item
C number 3.
C.
So this?
C, Roman number 3.
It says 40 days.
Yes, this is just, so from the date that we receive, or from the date an application is deemed complete, a notice of completion is sent to the applicant, and then from there, the Development Authority has 40 days to render a decision on the application.
Okay, so then would it have to read the date the application received, the 40 days to, there will be 40 days to process it? It just didn't read well to me, and perhaps maybe it's just me, but it just, I don't know, it just does not read well for me.
We'll have administration. Can you please put your mic on, Councillor Cummings?
I did read the whole C and then 3, and it still didn't seem to flow well to me, so perhaps it's just me, but it seemed to be missing something. So, I mean, we can leave it as is if council all agrees, it's fine. It could possibly just be me.
You have a comment, Councillor Cummings?
Yeah, maybe a comma after the word date. Because the 40 days to process the application expires does make sense. But you're right, the flow may not make sense grammatically without a comma after the date. I don't know, but it does make, when I read it all together, the letter shall indicate the date the 40 days to process the application expires. Does kind of make sense.
The date on which, or the date that.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for that, bringing that to our attention. So we have a motion on the floor then for first reading. One more question, Councillor Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Dahl. I just had a question, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate at this point and whether it should be set for later, but on page 48, when we're talking about 2.4 2B, which is talking about the, sending out notices to adjacent landowners. We're talking about using the scenario C, which is on page 52 for this. And I'm just wondering whether or not, whether consideration was given on the width of a roadway. I'm not sure if 20 meters is the width of a roadway, but just by being on several SDAB hearings, people who have been across the road or the kitty corner a lot have come to an SDAB saying that they weren't given notice, yet they were a direct site of the property that was making a change. And I'm just wondering if we could do some kind of a hybrid of 2 and 3, where you would include direct site as well as the 20 meters, just because of what I've experienced already on several hearings. And I don't know if it's appropriate to have this discussion at this point.
C.L. Williams?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. To Councilor Ryan's question, we can look into what is common practice in other land use bylaws. The question that comes to mind immediately, though, when you're talking about adding definitions or clauses around direct site, that is a very open term, I think, as well. So then we're into an interpretation issue. But we can look at clause 2 here and at least compare what we see can consider best practice.
Thank you, CEO Williams. I appreciate that, simply because of what I've experienced. And I know that a lot of people have said, well, we're right across the road, and I don't know if 20 meters takes into that roadway account distance, and it might just need to expand the distance rather than saying direct site. Thank you.
You? Okay, we're back to the motion that's on the floor for first reading. Did you need to intervene at all, Sarmad? Thank you. Okay. All right, I'll call for the vote. Those in favor for first reading? That's carried. And I'm looking for setting a public hearing date. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that council sets Monday, February 27th, 2023 at 1 p.m. in the council chambers as a date, time, and place for a public hearing on bylaw number 2023-03.
And I would call for the vote. Those in favor?
04.
Oh, okay, thank you very much for that change, so. All right, okay, now I'll call for the vote again. Those in favor? That's carried. Well done. Page 53, please, item 6C. I believe, is Sarmad staying with us? Okay, thank you for your time again. Bylaw 2023-05, non-residential tax incentive bylaw. C.O. Williams?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I'll speak to this one. So council saw a draft of this in the fall or late summer of 2022, and we did circulate it to our business community for some feedback. Got a little bit back, and mostly positive, and also ran it by a few, of course, legal, and then a few potential developers. So in 2019, the province of Alberta amended the Municipal Government Act to add a section to allow for multi-year non-residential tax incentives. Non-residential meaning not a house or farmland, or any oil and gas properties called DIP properties. This has been a popular and growing issue and action by many municipalities, and it's before council today for approval of the same. On the second page of the bylaw, or 55 of your agenda package, it is the details of the exemption. And sorry, that's page 56, the meat and potatoes part. So how this bylaw is laid out, it offers from $100,000 to $50 million and above, up to 5 years of tax incentive. And that's based on either a new property, a brand new business, so to speak, or expansion to the existing business that results in one of those thresholds of assessment increases being met. At the low end, $100,000 in new builds will grant 100% tax exemption, and greater than 50 million will exempt 5 years, scaling from 100% in year 1 and 2 to 25% in year 5. Of municipal taxes only, school tax and seniors tax is still required to be paid by the property owner. Outside of that, the parameters are set by the province and the MGA, with council having some authority to determine how that exemption rolls out. What I just explained is one area of council's control. The second piece, and which has changed since you've seen it, is the power to determine year 1 of the exemption. It's kind of difficult because you could go off of the year it hits the assessment roll versus the year the development permit is approved, but those are kind of moving targets, I would argue. So to make it easier and more clear for potential applicants, this bylaw has the CAO having the authority to determine what year 1 actually is. But outside of that, it looks the same. It's a 10-year period that expires in 2032. Happy to take questions on it.
Thank you for sharing that, CEO Williams. Councillor Blatz, and then Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan, through you to CEO Williams. So you've indicated here, CEO Williams, that you have circulated this amongst the business partners in town. And so far, relatively low feedback, negative, positive, mostly positive?
Yeah, of the 4 to 5 groups I would say I sent it to, I think I had 2 responses, and
Okay.
both were positive. And then we, when we meet with developers, now that this, since 2019 is still relatively recent, we get asked about this fairly frequently, so it's obviously in the development community it's a quite popular thing as well.
Okay, but this is non-residential, so this is not to do with residential. This is just strictly
Yeah,
for businesses trying to
industri-
attract.
industrial developers, I
Okay.
should clarify. yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. All right.
Councillor Daly?
You may have answered this question for me already in your previous answer, CAO Williams, but on criteria for tax exemption, under number D, it says at least 5 full-time employees. Now, if you look at a commercial business organization that would start up for $100,000, it'd be pretty hard, I find, to have those businesses, those small community businesses fit into this criteria then. Is this something that is written in the MGA, or is this something that we can be flexible on as a council?
Good question. This is something that council has discretion on. This was discussed, I believe, briefly, perhaps in August or September, when this was brought forward for initial consideration, and that to justify, I guess I would say, the foregoance of municipal taxes, that there ought to be some employment benefit to the community. So 5 was kind of a common number I've seen in other draft bylaws, but if council wishes, it can be 0, 1, 20, for instance.
Councillor Daly. Councillor Ryan?
Thank you very much, Mayor Dahl. Through you to CEO Williams. On page 57, we are talking about, appeals, and I'm just wondering, would we have, or is there a set out procedure for an appeal? And would there be a fee for an appeal, just like, if you get turned down from a development permit, there's always a fee if you get, if you have to appeal. So I'm just wondering what the process will be for that.
Also a good question, Councillor Ryan. So for this particular section, the MGA does say there must be an appeal mechanism, and I felt it best to keep it kind of open-ended, that it's going to go to council since the CAO does decide on every application, and that whatever information is presented to council by the appellant and administration, council can consider as it wishes, and there's no appeal fee I would recommend to be added, just.
You, CEO Williams, for your answers to our questions. I see one more coming from Deputy Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. And again, just a question through to the CAO. You mentioned there's a 10-year period to this. I assume on a yearly, annual basis, council, if requested through the administration, would get some kind of report that summarizes the amount of tax that's been exempted, foregone in each of these cases?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yes, is the short answer. But it's also important to point out some of the language you use, that this is not revenue lost to the municipality. It's just foregoing potential revenue in the hopes of encouraging or incentivizing future growth. But correct, we can easily track this metric. So.
Councillor Daly?
Thank you. Supplemental to my question earlier, and I just had some time to think on it here. And I'm going to throw the question out to council if they feel that 5 full-time personnel is a good number to have in there. I'm thinking myself that if we have a business opportunity that wants to come to Olds and start off as a small business, let's say as a retailer in downtown or as a convenience store or whatever, I just feel that the full-time equivalent there could be hindrance to them being eligible for this exemption, and that it may stop them from choosing Olds as a community to set up business. So I'm just throwing the question out to council whether they feel that 5 full-time employees is a good number to have in that statement.
Well, I certainly would have to ask council around the table as well. I'm not privy, not owning a business personally. There's a couple of people around the table. We'll go with Councillor Walsh and Councillor Cummings.
Just looking for a little bit of clarity, a $100,000 project could probably be completed in 2 or 3 months. So I'm just curious what you mean by full-time. Is it somebody working until it's complete full-time, or just, I just need some clarification around that.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh, and fair point. So this is, I don't say a gray area, it's meant for the business that will be operating at the end of the project. They have to more or less promise that they will employ at least 5 full-time people following the end of building or renovation. So.
Thank you for that clarity, Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm kind of agreeing with Councillor Daly here that the cost of creating or operating or starting a business in that to even up to $1 million is really still a small business, where 5 full-time employees is not. I mean, I think it's still classified by the province as a small business if you're up to 20 employees, and then a medium business at 20 employees. But in this dollar range of stuff, I mean, the building I'm in is worth more than $250,000. If I just bought the building to open the business that my business is in, I'd be well into the $1 million range before my business was set up and operating. These numbers are pretty small when you're talking about businesses. And to lease a space and then renovate it at $100,000, which is more along that dollar arrangement, you're looking at a husband-wife team, basically, or an individual working the store. It would be unrealistic to expect 5 full-time employees in a business that only costs $100,000, or an increase of, and that's the way I'm reading it, an increase of 5 full-time positions with a $100,000 increase in the assessment value of a business. I'm all for having more and more employees in a business. I just think that entire line really does remove the option 1 and 2 in the calculation of exemptions from being eligible. Because you're not going to normally see that type of employment scale in that small of a dollar amount of investment. The other ones, for sure, I could see that. Sometimes it depends. You open a garage, you're going to be over $1 million, and still maybe have a mechanic and 1 person. So I'm a little leery of keeping it in there, and I would rather see the line just removed entirely from the, sorry, which line was it exactly there? Have that line 1D removed entirely from the process. There's an obvious, someone's going to be employed, even if it's just a sole proprietor working that business, that person's employed in town. I'd rather just see that entire line removed.
Thank you, Councillor Cummings. From my experience, I think, and thinking back on, in the town of Olds, I can see small businesses that have opened and got to know the individuals, and it was, they would run it by family with 3 people, the husband, wife, and a child. But I really am not an expert to answer those questions, not owning a business myself. So what would, is this time sensitive? No, we've got, we should actually try and put a thought to this so our CAO can move forward with this, or give it first reading so we can bring it back. Councillor Cummings?
Then if I can, we'll make a motion on the floor to pass bylaw, that bylaw 2023-05, tax incentive be given first reading, amended to remove section 1D.
We could start there and see what council's decision is. Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Through you, maybe to CEO Williams. What was the reasoning behind that one, just that one section, section D? Is there something it's not mandated, is it? It was just an arbitrary number?
Yeah, it was discussed when it was first brought to council, and the thought was there ought to be some employment value add to foregoing tax dollars. I think leaving it in there as one full-time person, because generally every business will have at least one full-time person, even if it's say an unmanned car wash, so to speak, that the owner does contribute time, and that is a bit of a flexible definition. But it's just also a common thing in other bylaws I've read. But again, this is a relatively recent addition to the MGA and therefore to municipal governments. So I don't think a best practice has been found yet. So it's really whatever council is comfortable with, and we'll go from there. And you can pass all 3 readings as amended, or pass first and bring it back next month.
So then through you to Councillor Cummings, would he be friendly amendment to just have one full-time employee and leave that in here for now? Or do you want it completely removed? I mean, obviously, you're going to have one full-time employee no matter what.
Yeah, to me, the one employee or no employees is exactly the same. An expectation, the only difference I would see there is if this was not a new business, but an expansion to a business. So if I throw an extra $100,000 into my business, I can be eligible for this 100% one-year tax exemption, but then I have to hire a full-time employee to operate an expansion of my business that may not necessarily require an employee. So I would still prefer to have it as 0, simply for the fact that we have 2 aspects of this, new development and expanded development. The expanded development doesn't necessarily come with an employee.
However, I do recall the discussion we had with our CAO, and it is a tax incentive, and we did discuss this around the table. I don't agree with the deletion of the entire clause. I would see dropping it down to 1 or 2. I can't understand why we delete the line, but we'll go with Councillor Wilson and Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Very briefly, I don't support deleting it entirely. I can live with 1 full-time employee, as many as 3, but yeah, I don't support deleting it entirely. And the other thing I worry about or wonder about if we leave it as is, again, is the enforceability. But I'm fine with, if we said, must have at least 1 full-time employee, whether that's owner-operator or a hired individual or whatever.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. My thought is 2 full-time. I concur that I would rather keep it in because I remember this conversation that we had with regards to having an employee, and this is not for renovations of a business, this is for adding on to. So if you're expanding your business, then you are expanding, you're looking for growth, and more than likely, the reason for expansion is because you see growth there, and you more than likely will have to hire somebody else to operate. So I'm kind of looking at just I think 2 of full-time employees would be suitable. If there was one, how you were operating, a standard week with just one full-time person, or if you're an owner-operator, I don't know how you would do it, but that would be my feeling.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan, Councillor Daly, and then back to Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Mayor Judy. Yeah, my thoughts would be to have it at 2. That was my initial thoughts when I read this, that I thought 5 was quite high in the number of full-time. And I was leaning towards the number 2, so I would be happy with 1 or 2 full-time employees, whatever we land on here. Thank you.
You, Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, Councillor Wilson brought up a really good point here that kind of speaks to Councillor Ryan's issue as well, and that's enforceability. When we issue these permits, they're for dollar amounts, not purpose. So $100,000 investment in my business can absolutely be renovations. It doesn't have to be an expansion of services. It can be anything, and there's no way for us to enforce that or to monitor that or to control that in this process. A development permit is simply a dollar amount for development. So there's no way we can say that it's an expansion or a growth rather than just redecorating. Unfortunately, the process through the development agency doesn't allow that. The other one is enforceability of how many employees. I would hate to see us have an enforcement capacity built into this bylaw that exceeds the tax revenue that could ever be generated by this. So are we going to have an employee monitor these programs to make sure these employers maintain this employment level? I think that would be an unrealistic expectation in the bylaw. And the MGA does state that when we make bylaws that are enforceable and controllable. And this one I don't see as being enforceable. 1, 0, 2, 5, 10, it doesn't matter. It's just not, in my mind, an enforceable action that we can sit there and say the bylaw officer is going to monitor this place and maintain an employment level. It's a want-to-have. It's a good thing to have. Yep, let's force companies to, if they're going to take advantage of this, have full-time staff at their disposal. But I can't see how we could possibly make this enforceable. And how that enforceability would then be cost efficient to the town of Olds in the first place. So I'll amend this in any way you guys want to a specific number if you think that a specific number can be enforced. But it's not enforceable, and the MGA states that we can't make bylaws that aren't enforceable.
Thank you. C.O. Williams, then Blatz, and then Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dell. Councillor Cummings' comments. It's important to delineate between the different definitions of enforceability. This bylaw is not looking to enforce anything. What it's doing is setting an application process for a mathematical equation. That mathematical equation is the net increase in assessment value over a 1-year period based on a development permit for renovation, additions, new construction. Section 5 of the bylaw deals with the application for tax exemption program and delegates that to administration, essentially. So within the powers of Section 5, the application process, I'll use the word affidavit. It's not that strong, though. But the application will essentially be an affidavit agreeing to the terms of the bylaw, which forms the process. If someone lied to us, the only recourse is to not give them the tax exemption when it comes due, because they're always generally a year behind, because we're not going to, unless it's a significantly sized development, which will still have to adhere to the actual bylaw, we won't understand the full scope of the exemption as per the following section until the assessment roll comes in. So it's the proof is through our assessment program. It's not through us trying to take promises and enforce them. So there's obviously a bit of gray area in there, but it's fairly easy to administer on our part. And it generally comes up during the development approval, development agreement timeframe. The one-offs, $100,000 expansions, yeah, they'll take a bit more work, but still, I don't see a lot of risk here with enforceability.
Councillor Blatz and then Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. And CEO Williams actually more or less clarified what my question was going to be, because Councillor Ryan had said this wouldn't be a renovation, but it does say strictly under 1A, a refurbishment, which to me would indicate it could potentially be a renovation. So, and you did clarify that, so I appreciate it.
And I should clarify too that just because someone spends $100,000 more on a renovation, if it doesn't translate into an assessment increase, if you redo your bathroom in your home, it doesn't mean your assessment value is going to go up. For instance, it really depends on the assessment role, which our assessor repairs, which is provincially regulated. So it is a process outside of our control here. So.
Thank you for clarity. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. I agree with Councillor Blatz. I think CEO Williams spoke to the enforceability. Perhaps what we should just do is, obviously there needs to be a little bit more discussion. I'm not sure if we're ready for all three readings, and we have a motion on the floor amending this, and I think we should call the vote on that and go from there. Call question.
We could call for the amendment from Councillor Cummings, or he could withdraw the motion. Would you prefer to leave your motion? Councillor Walsh?
Yeah, I believe Councillor Cummings had indicated he'd change his motion. And I'm with Councillor Daly that 2 sounds good. It's a criteria. It prevents somebody who just thinks they can get under it with a renovation and not increase, employment within the community. So yeah, I would set it at 2 and go forward from there and do all 3 readings today.
And Councillor Cummings, I'll get right to you. Councillor Cummings, you did indicate you would be okay to change it to 2.
Yeah, I'll absolutely do a friendly amendment to change that to 2.
Okay.
And I do believe Councillor Ryan called the vote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Call a vote doesn't necessarily, you need to, even call the question is not necessarily, you call a question and we get to vote whether you call a question or not the original motion.
What Councillor Walsh is saying, call the question means you vote on calling the question, and then you vote on the motion on the floor. 2 motions will happen for your call the question, and thank you.
All right, so we are at the point where we're going to call the question. So we're at 2, and we're going to call the question on that because Councillor Cummings agreed to that. We're all good? All right, I will call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? That's carried unanimously. So first reading has been carried as amended.
Point of order, sorry, no, it hasn't. We just voted on calling the vote of the motion, so we now have to have a vote on the motion that I have on the floor.
That's right. That is absolutely correct. Well, Councillor Cummings also has first reading on the floor as amended. I will now call for the vote. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion. I will look now for second reading. I see Councillor Blatz over there.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. I move that bylaw 2023-05 tax incentive be given second reading as amended.
I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That is carried. We are now looking for consent for third reading. Deputy Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I motion that unanimous consent for third reading of bylaw 2023-05 tax incentive be given.
Thank you very much. I will now call for the vote for consent for third reading. Those in favor? That's carried unanimously, none opposed. And third and final reading, please. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that council approve bylaw 2023-05 tax incentive be given third reading as amended.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. I will call for the vote for third and final reading. Those in favor? That's carried unanimously, none opposed. Thank you very much, council members. I see we are moving to item 7, new business, page 58, and I believe our delegation did leave. Okay, I certainly understand why. So page 58, please, item 7A, South Red Deer Regional Wastewater Commission. C.O. Williams.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. So this operating agreement with SRD has several changes, but not many of them material. The main change on page 59 of your agenda package highlights the 3, with number 2 being really the only major one for your consideration. That's renewing the term to 2026. But happy to take questions should I be able to answer them.
Thank you for the introduction. Does council have any questions? I would ask for a motion, please. Okay. Deputy Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Thanks, Mars. I lost my screen. I would make the motion that council approve and direct administration to sign the operating agreement between the South Red Deer Regional Wastewater Commission and the Town of Olds.
Okay, no further questions. I will then call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried unanimously, no opposition. Item 7B, page 82, please. Okay, this is our organizational review executive summary. We are looking for a motion to adopt the organizational review report. I would look for a motion to get on the floor. Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I move that council adopt the organizational review report and direct the Chief Administrative Officer to bring forward an action plan for council's consideration within 45 days of January 23rd, 2023.
Thank you for that motion. Did you have your hand? C.O. Williams, you could speak to that, and then council if they have questions.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I just wanted to, because obviously the council has seen this report and had it presented to it by the consultant already, but for the public's information, I'd just like to say a few brief words that this attached to the agenda package is the executive summary portion of the report. The report itself is around 125 pages. Included in this summary is the 78 recommendations, which, when the entire report is released, will have more context to those. Once the report is presented to staff formally over the next few weeks, it will be released publicly in its entirety on the town's website. And but for public's information's sake, this report was commissioned in summer of 2022. It took approximately 4 months to complete by an organization called Transitional Solutions, Inc. And the purpose of the report was to examine the operational efficiency and effectiveness of the town of Olds. And just like any organization, there's improvements to be had and many options for council's consideration. The recommendation that Councillor Cummings just put on the floor is not necessarily adoption of all 78 recommendations. It's for administration to bring back its opinion on the fit and feasibility of those recommendations within 45 days for further discussion at council at an open meeting. But with that, if there's any other questions or information council believes should be on the floor at this point, happy to hear more.
Thank you for sharing that update with us, C.O. Williams. Does council have any further questions? We've worked with this quite closely with our CAO. All right, we have a motion on the floor right now from Councillor Cummings. I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Item 7C on page 94. And this is again the organizational review, that the action, that council action, the organizational review recommendation, etc. I would ask for a motion on the floor. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that council action recommendation 37, Planning and Engineering Department to be formed under the oversight of a newly created position of manager and the department and not and, I think, and direct the CEO to proceed accordingly.
I would ask at this time if council would like to speak to anything. CEO Williams, would you? Thank you.
Thank you again, Mayor Dahl, and for clarity's sake, because obviously council did discuss this previously, but for transparency's sake and the public domain, the 2023 budget has been passed already, and there's no plans nor funds to hire additional employees based on this report. What this action on recommendation 37 is starting a process to reform our operational department, specifically to bring together engineering and planning functions, which, in the opinion of the report, and something that I share as well, has been a weak spot in the town for quite a while. That if we had better oversight and expertise working together, we would have a better idea of capital project planning and long-term infrastructure and land use plans. And on top of that, hopefully a better stream to coordinate infrastructure needs with our long-term financial plans as well, and therefore budgets. There will be a internal shuffling of employees to promote to manager, which is the financial implication of $12,000 annually going forward. That has not been finalized yet, but that is the intention with this recommendation. But as council's well aware, the CAO has authority to hire people, but it does not have authority to create new positions. That is council's domain. So that's why this recommendation has been brought forward post haste.
I just have a note, and it's strictly for just easy access for the future. Would it be easier for reference in the future when we're looking for a motion that we add organizational review action, etc.? We've talked about how we want consistency. Can you add that friendly amendment, Councillor Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I'm not sure we need to add that to this because we already are talking about that is part of the org review, but I could add that with, I'm not sure how you want to word it, but.
Before recommendation to make it consistent, and we're speaking to the organizational review. A lot of people just look at the motions, and so they wouldn't see that part,
Yes,
what
I
we were
agree.
talking about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Yes, the council action organizational review recommendation 37. How's that? Blah, blah,
Etc.
blah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll call for the vote at this time then. Those in favor? That's carried. Now going to go to our added item, which I've named 7D for the Rural Renewal Stream Partnership. Are you speaking to this, CEO Williams?
Thank you again, Mayor Dahl. So, as council may be aware through some correspondence with the small business community in Olds, there is a labor shortage, not a surprise to anyone. It is nationwide. And the Alberta government has been working to address this. Alberta's Rural Renewal Stream is part of two strategies right now. We are already part of the first strategy, which I will name the Entrepreneurial Stream. There is a correct name for that I don't have handy right now. The second stream we are not eligible for, and is this Rural Renewal Stream. After some research and discussions our EDO did with local communities, we realized that we could partner with a designated community under the RRS. The only one in our area is the town of Innisfail, and pending that community's approval, which initial conversations have been positive, they have agreed to let us partner with them under their designated stream for the RRS. Designation, that's clumsy language, but I think you get my point. For us to be eligible on our own, we would need what the province, Alberta Labour specifically, deems an economic plan that sets out attraction, recruitment, retention strategies for immigrant labor, and that is forthcoming starting in 2023 with the funded ED strategy. But for now, we are ineligible unless we can partner to achieve the designated community status. So that is what's before council today.
That's very exciting, and I look forward to Mayor Barkley from Innisfil and her council and/or staff and administration to get back to us. This is really good for our community. Thank you for your work on that. I'd ask for a motion, please. Councillor Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I move that council approve a partnership with the town of Innisfil to become a designated community under the Government of Alberta's Rural Renewal Stream.
All right, I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried unanimously. That's wonderful. Okay, we're down to page 95. We're now at the reports from council boards, commissions, and committees. I'll get a motion on the floor, and then we'll start with the reports. Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that the reports from council, authorities, boards, committees, and commissions ending January 23rd, 2023 be received for information.
Thank you. I do see there were two highlighted here, but not attached to the agenda, so, or that I could see. Were they there? Well, okay, well, I didn't get them, but that's okay. I trust they're just fine. Is there any questions to the board committees for Mount View Water Commission and Regional Library? I'm sorry, I don't have them in my agenda, but if you have them in yours, do you have any questions? If not, let's go with reports. Who would like to start? Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and I did have a written report which I neglected to bring along with me this afternoon, but I did attend all regular council meetings, CAO conversations, and MPC meetings. I also attended the Mix and Mingle for the Olds Chamber of Commerce, which I thought was a very well-attended evening, and it seemed it was a lot of fun. I also, of course, attended the Mountain View Regional Water Commission meeting, which the minutes are now attached to this agenda, and also our priority setting session that we had with council and administration.
Thank you, Councillor Blatz. We may as well go around then. Councillor Walsh?
Yeah, so far it's been a quiet month. I've attended all council meetings that have been scheduled and also the priority setting meeting last week. That's short and sweet.
Thank you, Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. As well, it's been a quiet month for myself, attending council meetings, policy and priorities, as well as CAO conversations and special council meeting. Attended, of course, I'm the chair of the Municipal Planning Commission, as well as attended the Mix and Mingle for the Chamber of Commerce, and attended the priorities meeting in Leduc as part of last week's activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So again, nothing relatively different from everybody else. I did attend one breakfast meeting with the Olds and District Special Families Voices Committee. They're a group of concerned citizens within the special needs community, trying to develop a programming, I don't know how to say that, programming, a group of programs or a set of programs for the special needs communities, mostly as family and advocates for that community. We did, Councillor Daly and I were both there, and we did talk about two events that they're hosting. One is a game night at Pandora's Box and Teas, and the other one is a drumming circle through one of the music teachers here in town. They're looking for some other venues, facilities, and things like that. So I did put them in touch with our community services department so that they can see whatever help we can offer as a town for their organization. Other than that, nothing else is different. Thank you.
What portfolio was that under? It's a kind of interesting group.
I don't know how you classify it. I just put it as a community group because we do meet with community groups throughout our tenure, and that's in our budget there for that. So I just went and, my personal attachment to Horizon School, and this is generally the community that's derived from Horizon School in our community. We do have the largest per capita group of special needs individuals in Alberta residing here in Olds as our citizens. We do have a very large number of employees, workers in the town of Olds that are associated with this industry. So when you look at economic development in our community, this is a huge part of our economy. And it's kind of left off to the side that people don't really realize how big of a chunk of our community economic structure is based on this group through Horizon School, as well as the 4 special needs providing groups in town. So and these are the parents of those children and adults who are in our community, and this is just another way for them to be helped by the community itself through community groups rather than by paid-for organizations.
Would they entertain coming to a council policies and priorities meeting?
Absolutely. So that's why we directed them first to speak with Director Wagstaff and his team so that they can best guide them through the process of coming to the town and seeing what information that they would be sharing for that and their long-term goals here in Olds.
Thank you, Councillor Cummins. Councillor Ryan?
Yes, I think,
No, Councillor Blatz, if you had a question. Okay, thank you. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dahl. I do have a written report that I'll provide for Marcy, but did Mountain View Seniors Housing, we met the chair, myself as chair, and then the vice chair, as well as our CEO, met with Jason Nixon, MLA, on January 12th. We had a good discussion around the similar items that we raised with Nathan Cooper earlier. But with this, we also had talked about the net proceeds we get from the sale of our assets. And as a direct result from that meeting, we're actually having a meeting with some government officials on January 30th to further that discussion, talk about those proceeds, where we can use it. PCPS, the board conducted interviews to try to replace our director. We made an offer, but unfortunately the individual accepted an offer somewhere else. But going through the process, we realized that we had to redefine the job description. We've done that, and we've reposted that position, and hopefully we'll get some interviews going shortly. The board is also working on creating a new funding model with the goal of to make PCPS more sustainable while continuing to provide services that municipalities require. I had a SDAB hearing with regards to property here in Olds on January 17th. A written decision will be released soon. We're just finalizing that written decision, so that'll come out quickly. And then I attended all of the regular council meetings and whatnot, including the priority session as well. I attended the mix and mingle with the chamber, which was a fairly popular evening. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan, and Deputy Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. No, just a few comments. The one committee I sit on as a representative is the Olds and District Chamber of Commerce, and they continue to work on some of their internal processes, things like their member-to-member benefits program, chamber chat, online marketing. A couple of key dates coming up. Spring, likely May-ish, will be their Chamber of Commerce AGM. And in the fall, as is typical, is the Small Business Week in October. And then the Small Business Awards for Olds will also be in October. And they're working as well on building their visibility, obviously coming out of the pandemic. So things like the meet and greet and improving their profile and hopefully increasing their membership. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. The period December 13th to January 22nd, I will follow the standing meetings. December 14th, Central Alberta Mayor's Reeves year-end was in Red Deer, and the guest speaker was Central Zone Search and Rescue Alberta, Bev Slinger. They are a provincial association for volunteer search and rescue with the province, and mission is to assist search and rescue teams. They provide over $2.5 million annually in infrastructure support of regional police, fire, emergency response, security, first aid, and functions throughout the entire province. And they're all done by volunteers. It was a very good presentation. I have their card, and they would be willing to come to PNP if council so wishes. December 14th was OFL Board of Directors December meeting, and it was my last attendance. Olds Fiber Limited, operating as no ONET recruitment process, is now open for public at large director applications to replace council, and currently 2 elected officials have stepped down. December 19 and 16th, we had a CAO council conversation with our council, and December 20th was a council special council meeting at the Mountain View County with regards to the fire service sub-agreement, which was signed. And December 20th was the Intermunicipal Cooperation Committee year-end with all council joint meeting. There was also a organizational review report on December 22nd with all council, January 9th, regular council meeting, as well as January 9th, Municipal Planning Commission meeting. And a highlight that's been shared around the table, congratulations to the Olds Chamber of Commerce for their mix and mingle networking with businesses. It was good to see the businesses and have a chat with so many new ones. And January 18th to the 19th, of course, our priority setting strategic workshop with all council members. And that's it for this report. If there's any questions or nothing further, we have a motion from Councillor Blatz on the floor. Seeing no questions, I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. All right, we can move down to the next item on the agenda, which is the CAO report, please. Page 97, and CAO Williams, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mayor Dahl. So the first item is from the action item list, the one outstanding item, the New to You financial summary that was supposed to come last meeting. Now it's here this meeting. So at the presentation in November, council requested more information brought back from the estimated non-budgeted cost that was presented by Director Wagstaff. So for reminder's sake, New to You's budget was approximately allocated 5% of the manager's time in community services was put towards the, or put against rather, the net revenue profit from New to You for a value of approximately $6,400. For the staff time that went unaccounted since I should do at least 5 years or so. We have facilities, snow clearing, and garbage. These are, I would say, conservatively estimated, especially since I did miss the, on garbage disposal, we always send 2 people to the dump. It's only accounted at 1 person, but the estimated cost unaccounted for in staff wages, just $10,728. And that is not inclusive of the items listed below, which include any additional cover for vacation or sick leave, which hadn't really happened with the most recent manager, but and through COVID as well, but was a common occurrence for previous iterations, and then sporadic HR and health and safety requirements for town office staff with New to You. And then the last paragraph on the page just speaks to the previous year's grant allocations for New to You and the need to draw down the New to You reserve to keep the grant allocations at least $10,000. Well, I think 2021 profit was $8,500. So with the declining revenue, rising building costs, which utilities, of course, were rising, and the ongoing subsidization through unaccounted fees. It's then added on the just attention Nudie took from the department that now no longer has a manager of community services with a recent reshuffle. It's managed now repurposed as a parks and recreations manager, essentially eliminating the person who used to spend approximately 5% of their time there. And that is what I think council was looking for additional information, but happy to take any further questions once I go through my report here. Marcy, for the next page, the action items are complete. We had no PMP in January, so nothing was added in January, but February is just around the corner. And then a couple verbal items, if I find where I'm at. There has been a request from the Olds Chamber of Commerce to present at their March 8th luncheon. I have accepted to present there, at least myself. We have 20 minutes, and they invited myself, the mayor, and our EDO. I'm not sure if that's feasible with 3 people, but we'll make something work, just as an FYI. And certainly, at least myself will be presenting there on a town update is how they phrased it. The final thing, Director Lindeman has calculated what we consider our final totals for water loss and I&I in 2022. It's obviously not that pretty with an ongoing leak we're trying to solve, which turned into several leaks in the same location. Water loss was up 6% to 30% in 2022. I&I, with our June events, it increased from 33% in 2021 to 48% in 2022. Fairly troubling numbers, of course, and efforts are ongoing to begin to rectify that. So that is my report. Happy to take questions.
Thank you for sharing that information with us. Does council have any questions? All right, seeing no questions, I'd ask for a motion, please, to set for information. Okay, Council Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that the verbal CEO report be accepted for information.
For the vote, those in favor? That's carried, thank you. And now financial, page 132, item 10A. I believe Director Linderman is here and is ready to go.
Thank you, Mayor. So the tax exemptions were brought to council previously at the January 9th meeting. Council had requested administration to bring this item back with only the municipal portion of the property taxes being made exempt and what that would look like. Since that time, I did confirm with municipal affairs on the wording in the MGA and what property taxes meant. It is a full exemption of all taxes, including requisitions. So we are unable just to take out the municipal portion. Again, in the RFD, I did highlight in red any changes I made to the RFD. So I just added a little bit more clarity around the legislative authorities, that being the Community Organization Property Tax Regulation. I also included that in the agenda package for council to be able to look through. So again, the only question for all of these exemption applications would be whether or not council deems the charitable or benevolent purpose for which the property is primarily used is a purpose that benefits the general public in the municipality in which the property is located. And with that, I will open it up.
Thank you for that. Before I share my process, are there any questions for Director Lindeman? She's pretty well stated exactly what the process is, so we will now move forward with doing separate motions because they're all different groups and there could be change of questions and or differing decisions on each. So we'll start with number 1. I'd look for a motion for number 1. Councillor Walsh?
Thank you, Mayor. I would move that the application for property tax exemption submitted by Imagine Gymnastics Club be accepted for the 2023 taxation year.
I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. And I saw Councillor Daly, you had your hand up. Would you like to do the second for Friends of the Grizzlies?
I will. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director Linderman, for the answering our questions. It was educational to say the least. I move that council approve the application of property tax exemption submitted by the Friends of the Grizzlies be accepted for the 2023 taxation year.
Questions? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And for motion, please, for Scouts Canada. We'll start with Councillor Blatz, and then we'll go around the table for the others.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that the application for property tax exemption submitted by Scouts Canada be accepted for the 2023 taxation year.
Thank you. I will call for the vote then for Scouts Canada. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Carried unanimously, sorry. For Mountain View Lodge 16, please, a motion, and I'll go over this side now. No motion? Oh, okay. Deputy Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I make the motion that the application for property tax exemption submitted by Mountain View Lodge number 16 be accepted for the 2023 taxation year.
Thank you. Do we have questions on the floor? I don't see any questions, so I will call for the vote. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Look, I'd like to call motion for Boys and Girls Club. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that the application for property tax exemption submitted by the Boys and Girls Club be accepted for the 2023 taxation year. And I also want to just point out that thank you very much to Sheena, for Director Lindeman, for providing that information. It was good to learn, and it certainly gives us clarity going forward. Thank you.
Any questions? I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? Carried unanimously. And for Padnoma support, please, I guess, Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I move that the application for property tax exemption submitted by Padnoma Support Services be accepted for the 2023 taxation year.
Any questions? I'll call, is there a question? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see your hand from your computer. There, I see it. Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick question here on Padnoma for the application process. This is not a for-profit business, this is a not-for-profit business. I was a little confused about that one. Because that's a requirement, right, that it be a not-for-profit?
Correct, they are not for profit.
Thank you. Any further questions? I will call for vote at this time. Those in favor? That is carried unanimously. And I'll need one more motion, please, for Central Alberta Pregnancy Care Centre. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that the application for property tax exemption submitted by the Central Alberta Pregnancy Care Centre be accepted for the 2023 taxation year.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. I will ask if there's any questions. Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for administration for bringing dialogue with council in this regard for this item. And we will now turn to page 152, please. And that will be for correspondence and information. I'd like a motion to get that on the floor. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that the correspondence and information report ending January 23rd, 2023 be received for information.
Thank you. Before I move further, I would like to ask if there's any questions to any of these items.
I do have one, but I gotta find it here.
Okay. And then I will move forward with some questions or some answers.
Your Worship, the question I have is that are we going to send a letter also accompanying the letter from, and I can't seem to find it here right now, from the individual that has sent the concerns in regards to the provincial police.
Thank you for opening the floor on that, and I would like to speak to that. Yes, that's a very good question. This draft letter, I will just share briefly with you because the information was brought to Mayor's South Central, and it was discussed, and it was, the letter you see before you was out of discussion that we wanted our council to have something we wanted to bring something forward back to the council of all the discussions that were on the table, and Mayor Colby agreed that he would write that letter. This is the draft letter here. Now, there's been some councils that have moved forward and asked and talked to their councils already in this regard. I will also add to you that Mayor Barkley contacted Alberta government on policing for Alberta Munis, and the Alberta Munis Interim Police Committee will be meeting on January 27th, so they should be able to provide more information for us as well. It was very important to get this in front of you to just let you know that the Mayor South Central municipalities. I believe there's 3 more that have already talked to their councils in regards to this. There was a little hiccup over Christmas, and people didn't know if they had time to send it, and it just kind of got lost. And I'd also bring to your attention on January 17th, 2023, the Innisfil area MLA Devin Dreeshen spoke. I don't know if anybody had the opportunity to read that in the paper. It was, I believe, in the front page as well. I know the other mayors received some communication from around, and I just decided that I'd just bring it up with you. He spoke about he expressed his doubts. The public has been given a clear picture from the Alberta government on why provincial police force would be a better law enforcement fit than the RCMP, and it goes on, but you certainly still can read it. It was in the Albertan, and you likely could still see it online. So being the letters here, we'll be continually bringing back more information, especially if we hear back at all from Alberta Munis on their meeting that they're upcoming having on the 27th. I think that's going to be important because I know there's a couple mayors, other than myself, that have been directly speaking to the rep for them. So if you have any questions that you'd like me to bring back on that, I'd be more than happy to. Other than that, I'm going to continue to keep you in the know and keep the flow of information coming back of what we hear, so that we could, I believe we should, we really haven't sat down as a council together. We have been to many meetings in the communities and other communities, but I can't really sit here and look at every individual and say, what are we thinking? I'm really happy to see that they brought this back up. They basically, as Alberta Municipal Affairs has said, it's basically kind of just went quiet, and we're very concerned about that because we have over 300 municipalities in Alberta, and they need to have a say, and there's an election coming up. So if we don't write a letter, each municipality, saying whatever our thoughts are, I encourage council to let myself know if you want to move forward with a letter. And Councillor Cummings has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Since we're kind of on this topic here, I know we've authorized an assessment, I don't know what we called it there, on this issue. I, for one, don't want to send a letter off without at least getting that review back. We were paying good money to have that done to see how that would look in our community in the first place. So I'm just wondering if we've got a timeline on that process at all.
And I'd be happy for our CEO to answer that question. I would like to know as well.
Not a firm timeline. I had the interview, as I'll call it, last week with the Alberta Solicitor General. I believe by the end of February, they're hoping to have notification out if you're successful or not for the $30,000 grant. It's no cost to the town, of course. And yeah, then it would probably take, I would estimate, 3 to 6 months to complete that consultant study on the feasibility of a standalone or regional police service for the town of Olds.
Any other questions? We just don't want to let this die. We need to have a voice. We just need to make an opinion. And I would really appreciate if the Town of Olds Council could close this with some comments and a letter, at least saying where we feel. But again, our CEO has just told us now that where we're sitting with that. Councillor Cummings?
Maybe we can add this to the next council meeting's agenda to have a fulsome discussion about it, or even the PMP meeting ad hocly, because having an opinion about that before we send a letter should be an open debate in council, I think.
That's exactly why this letter's in here, Councillor Cummings, because everybody's taking it as an open debate. This is just the dialogue that's been shared with some facts that Mayor Colby has researched. And I'm leaving it up to you to read and continue to add questions, delete questions, or we'll do it together. So I'll just leave that with administration then, to that point. And Councillor Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I do believe that the town of Olds had sent a letter at one point with regards to this issue early on. So there might be something on file with regards to that. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but our legislative clerk is shaking her head yes. And so I know we have said something already. But it would be good to have some kind of conversation at some point to feel everybody out, to see how they feel with regards to this. I know that I have read somewhere where the federal government is actually going to be looking at getting provinces to take on the policing. I read that somewhere along the line during all of this process. So I'm not sure whether or not the Alberta government is out of line with doing it. I know that my opinion was, but I don't know what the rest of council is, so conversation would be good at some point.
And the draft letter that was presented here today doesn't stop there. It also talks about the faltering court system as well, and other issues that haven't been looked at. But thank you. Sounds good. So I believe that is, do we have a motion? Did I get a motion? Okay. Councillor Ryan has a motion on the floor. If there's nothing further anybody has to speak to, I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Nothing further, so at this time, I would ask for adjournment, please, at 3:57 p.m. Anybody? Councillor Daly.
I so move that we adjourn at 3:57 p.m.
Thank you very much. Those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you for coming, Doug, and have a good evening, everyone.